With so many notable names at pass rusher, is there one untouchable for the Arizona Cardinals? Johnny Venerable, Brack, PHNX Cardinals, Mike Green out of Marshall. Cardinals have seemingly worked out every top 30 visit at pass rusher worth meeting with, except for Mike Green.
Except for Mike Green, nothing has been reported pre-draft, at least at the recording of this. The Cardinals and Mike Green have connected. And, I think that's a big telltale sign. You talk to Austin Fort, you talk to Gannon, you look at the caliber of prospect that they've drafted, especially in the first round, with Paris Johnson Jr., a leader in that locker room, not only just a top prospect on the field, but off the field. Same thing goes for Marvin Harrison Jr., Darius Robinson. You can go deeper rounds, guys, Michael Wilson and Garrett Williams, just to name a few. Mike Green's got some big-time red flags as far as the off-the-field goes, despite, Johnny, being the most productive edge in this class the previous college football season with 17.5 sacks.
Yeah, I think you make an argument just from a player standpoint, a prospect standpoint. He's the most explosive edge rusher not named Abdul Carter in this draft. I know we've had Fran Duffy on his show, and he pushes back at the notion that, if the off-the-field concerns were not there, would he be a firm top 10 pick? I think he's at least firm top 12 with a lot of teams needing a pass rusher, but his reputation off the field is going to give, folks hesitation, maybe significant hesitation. And I include the Arizona Cardinals in that camp because I do believe if the Cardinals were seriously considering Mike Green, he would have been here for a top 30 visit. The Cardinals are in a position where the roster is almost fully rebuilt, right?
Yeah.
And you could take on a player with quote-unquote character concerns. We've talked about James Pierce Jr., who maybe doesn't vibe with necessarily everybody, and there's some questions about Walter Nolan. This is a completely different situation. And so when the Arizona Cardinals go up and pick a player at 16, they have to be able to sell it to not only the players in that locker room, but their owner, this fan base.
Yeah.
I just don't think this franchise right now views Mike Green's upside worth the risk. The investment is not worth the risk in their opinion.
Doesn't feel like it. Doesn't seem like the Cardinals are in that business. But Fran Duffy, will he make the case with his prospect breakdown? Let's hear from our top draft analyst.
All right, let's talk through Marshall pass rusher Mike Green, one of the most productive players in college football this past season. 17 sacks and 23 TFLs. Outstanding numbers this year for the Thundering Herd. Let's now rewind, though, to a little bit just to get a sense of his journey. He was a 3-star athlete recruit coming out of high school. A lot of people graded him as a receiver or a tight end when he arrived at the University of Virginia. Did not play his first year, then left the school, goes to Marshall in 2023. Didn't really play for the Thundering Herd as a sophomore. Then this year, he blows up, has that one season of outstanding production, declares for the draft, goes to the Senior Bowl, does a nice job there through 2 days, has a moment that goes viral, one of the most violent reps in a pass rush drill that I've ever seen, where he took Oregon offensive tackle Josh Connerly, bull rushed him into oblivion, knocked him horizontal, parallel to the grass, and then says, you know what, I've had enough for the week, and he calls it quits and he heads home. But he goes viral, does a nice job over the course of the week, those first 2 days of practice. I think when you're looking at Mike Green, look, the production speaks for itself. And it wasn't just what he did against some of the schools that are on Marshall's schedule that are a little bit lower level of competition. Ohio State, he had a sack. Virginia Tech early in the season had a sack. So he showed up in some of those other big opponents as well. When you're looking at him, the number one thing with it, 100 miles an hour every single snap. The rush is never done with Mike Green. He's exceptionally violent on contact. He arrives with bad intentions against offensive linemen, guards that are pulling in his direction, tight ends and fullbacks. Don't worry about that. You don't want guys that are smaller going up against Green. Even though he's 6'3", 250, he's not the most physically imposing pass rusher you're going to come across in the NFL draft. And that, to me, is going to be the big concern with him moving forward to the NFL. Is he going? He's not a top flight athlete based off film study. He's not that super powerful, going to consistently displace blockers and push them back into the pocket. He's going to win with effort. He's going to win with technique at the top of the rush and just be able to get home. I do think he can further develop that pass rush plan and get a little bit more consistent there, because that's how he's going to have to win. Because the physical gifts are what they are, he's going to have to be a technician. He's going to have to be that consistently high motor guy, which he showed off here in 2024. That's going to be the thing, though, with Mike Green. What is the ultimate physical upside of this player? There's some off-field concerns that he addressed at the Combine publicly in his press conference that he will also have to make sure is cleared with NFL teams as well. We'll keep that as a separate part of the projection. But just strictly on field, you love the way that this guy plays. He's got scheme versatility and that he could play as an outside backer, stand up off the edge, or as a hand-in-the-dirt defensive end. I do think he could fit in any scheme. He's really violent against the run. Can he get a little bit stronger? Yes, I think he can afford to add a little bit of weight and hold up a little bit more consistently against the run. But this is an extremely violent, competitive rusher. The production speaks for itself. And a lot of people, a lot of scouts, a lot of coaches will say that pass rush production, maybe more than any production, any other position, that carries forward. That travels with you from college to the NFL. If you believe that, then you're going to like Mike Green and his projection to the next level.
Great stuff from Fran. Of course, you can read his work, gophnx.com, his mega draft guide. Get it now, where he's got Mike Green, edge rusher number 6. I think he looks at Mike Green very much as like a firm first-round pick, and teams, it only takes one, as he mentioned, to fall in love with him, whether it's the Atlanta Falcons, Cincinnati Bengals, maybe a team later on, back half of the first round. But I just feel like, listen, he dominated the Senior Bowl, right? Dominated the Combine. Has seemingly said all the right things this offseason. And we know the Cardinals, Bo, want to see you check all those boxes at this time of year. They love Senior Bowl guys, for instance. It just feels like right now, barring something unforeseen and maybe the biggest smokescreen in the Austin Ford era, Mike Green is going to land with somebody else not named Arizona.
Yeah, and look, I think the Cardinals would be fully content with that because they didn't anticipate taking a guy like Green anyway. Remember the days of Steve Keim where he infamously said, the embattled GM, he said, if Jack the Ripper had a nice 40 time, people would call like him colorful, with all the baggage that Jack the Ripper, the notorious murderer from the 1800s. I think that, those days are over as far as the Cardinals. And if there's any significant red flags, and look, there's 2 incidents that are well known as far as Mike Green, it's kind of a deal breaker.
I think you mentioned Keim, and hitting maybe on Tyrann Mathieu was the worst thing that could have happened for Keim, because then it enabled him to do it again and again. Robert Nkemdiche comes to mind. We know, I know this was pre-Steve Keim. Michael Floyd had his off-the-field demons. Like, the Cardinals are, and you got to respect this mindset, they're in a position of person, player, try to hit doubles and triples, and if you get an occasional home run, great. And for this franchise that has had so many first-round busts, early draft busts for a number of reasons, they're just not in position to take a swing like this, in my opinion. Even when they took Nkemdiche, it was 28th overall. I mean, you had some cachet coming off the NFC title game. This is a team that needs to make the playoffs this year. I mean, if you bring Mike Green in your locker room and immediately something comes out or something happens, or maybe something comes out from the time where he was a collegiate player, it's just not a risk this team's willing to take, on top of the fact, Bo, this is such a loaded edge class, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even if you feel like a player is 10, 15% less of Mike Green, get him into your building and coach him up. I'd rather roll the dice on somebody who's squeaky clean off the field.
I think the Cardinals, if they were faced with it, Green or somebody who just finished behind him nationwide as far as, productivity, like Ezeraku from Boston College, they probably would lean on the BC edge instead of Mike Green, who was doing it at Marshall, not against top-tier talent, but 17 sacks, 23 TFLs for Mike Green. Is he worth it? At least if he's on the board or the Cardinals are on the clock, drop a comment, like this video.